In this video, we're going to show you how to install a purpose-built Rockford Fosgate audio system. Hey everyone, I'm Eric and we're back here in the Rockford Fosgate R&D lab. Today, we're going to install a Stage 4 kit in this Polaris RZR 1000 XP High Lifter Edition. First, let's go ahead and get started by removing the seats and disconnecting the battery. Now that that's done, we're going to remove the hood and upper dash assembly. The dash assembly is held in place with two T40 screws. When pulling the panel off, be careful of the metal clips as to not scratch the dash. Go ahead and disconnect all the harnesses and make note of where each harness connects for when it's time to reassemble. Okay, now that we're done with that, we're going to remove the lower dash so it's easier to see the radio installation process. First, we'll remove the safety handle, then use a T40 to remove the lower pocket. Now, once all those are removed, we can go ahead and pull the dash off. As you notice, when removing the lower dash, there were two additional T40 screws that were hiding that had to be removed. Also, when removing the lower pocket, we disconnected the footboard LED that will zip tie to an existing harness. Now, on our High Lifter Edition, we also disconnected this winch controller that we'll need to relocate. Now that we're done with that, we're going to talk to you about the dash kit. You'll notice there's a lot of components included. Now these pieces are designed for 2019 and newer RZRs that will be covered in another video. We'll be using these components for the 2014 to 2018 models like the one that we have here. Okay, now that we covered the components included in the dash kit, we're going to show you how to install the source unit. Using the supplied hardware, we're going to use a 3mm Allen to mount the front bezel to the lower pocket by sandwiching a metal bracket to the back side. Take note, there's flanges on the top and bottom of the bracket. These will need to go toward the dash. There are also provisions for auxiliary switches in both the bezel and metal bracket, so be sure to properly align those. Now, once we get it secured, we'll mount the source unit from the back using the remaining hardware. Now we're ready to install our wiring harness. To get started, remove the factory grommet and with an X-Acto knife, score through the rubber to make way for our cables. Once done, replace the grommet. Take the end of the harness with the ring terminals and from the inside, route them up through the factory grommet to the accessory wiring panel. This terminal strip is just a simple distribution block, so there's no wiring behind it. With our 10mm nut driver, simply connect the red wire to the accessory terminal and the black wire to the ground terminal. Notice that we're not using the constant B positive terminal indicated by the large red cable because we need our source unit to turn on and off with the ignition switch. Okay, now that we're done with that, we're ready to disassemble the rest of the vehicle. We'll go ahead and remove the center tunnel and back access door by removing the 3 T40 screws and the 4 push pins using our removal tool. Now we're ready to install our main power harness and our rear speaker harnesses. We'll start with the fuse end of the power harness and run it down the radiator compartment near that terminal block. We'll follow the factory wiring down to the center tunnel. Then we'll pull the wiring harness through that tunnel back to the battery location. Now be sure to avoid the driveline and any radiator tubing. The wiring harness is long enough to accommodate 4-seat RZRs. In this 2-seat RZR like we have here, we'll loop any excess cable in the battery storage compartment. Then we'll run the left and right rear speaker harnesses following that same path as the power harness. We'll rest our rear speaker harnesses near the rear seat belt location for the time being. Now that we're done with that, we're ready to route our power and speaker connectors back through the factory grommet. Now once we pull these harnesses through, we'll leave enough slack up here for any connections that need to be made. Now we want to talk about the new subwoofer enclosure. This is a cool all-new design that's ported for higher bass output. It's also lighter than its predecessor. Now, if you like a sealed box for tighter bass response, or will be submerging the RZR at any point, we include this port cap that can be secured into place. The enclosure replaces your glove box, so we'll be reusing 2 main bolts that attach it. We'll also be using 2 supplied screws to secure the enclosure to the floorboard. Once we get the subwoofer wired and loaded, we'll mount the enclosure in place, connect our harness, and run it to the center of the dash. Note that we also include 2 foam strips for the lower dash clips that fit the receptacles in the front of the enclosure. This will eliminate any vibration while keeping the panel in place. Alright, let's go ahead and get this subwoofer wired and loaded. You'll notice that the model supplied in this kit has 2 sets of terminals, which means it's dual voice coil. But the enclosure only has 1 set of wires. We'll use this jumper wire to connect both voice coils together to get it properly configured. Then we'll connect our enclosure wires to the open terminals of the sub. Red goes to positive, black goes to negative. Once it's wired, we'll load the subwoofer into the enclosure, align it with the proper mounting holes, and secure it in place using the supplied hardware and Allen bit. Now that we're done with that, we're ready to install our lower speaker pods. You'll notice these have channels built into them. This one is for the side subframe, and this one is for the wiring harness. Now, we're going to start off using our 1/2-inch socket to remove the lower bolt from the side of the subframe. Then, we'll insert this threaded standoff to replace that factory bolt. Then we'll use this threaded screw to secure the enclosure to the side of the RZR. Once that's done, you'll use the included ball head Allen and secure the enclosure to the bottom floorboard using the supplied hardware. Once we're done with that, we'll route the speaker harnesses to the lower pocket and zip tie them in place. Now that we're done with that, we're ready to install our speakers. First, we'll connect the positive and negative wires to the speaker terminals. You'll notice these are keyed so you can't mix polarity. Then, using the supplied hardware and included Allen bit, we'll use the number 1 holes in those lower speaker pods to secure our speakers. Now we're ready to install our amplifier kit. You'll notice the kit comes with 2 amplifier plates. The small one is for 2019 and newer RZRs that we'll cover in another video. The big one is for 2014 to 2018 RZRs, like the one that we have here. The amp plate mounts to the subframe crossbar under the dash. The first thing we'll do is use a 10mm socket to remove the lower pocket bracket. Then, using a 15mm socket and wrench, loosen the 2 steering column bolts that will be used to sandwich our plate into place. We'll position the plate onto the subframe and reuse the bolt from our lower pocket bracket to secure it into place. Once everything's aligned, we'll go ahead and tighten everything down. Okay, at this point we're ready to mount our amplifier. Now, for orientation, the Rockford Fosgate logo on the amp should be oriented in the same direction as the Diamond R logo on the amp plate. First, we're going to remove the power plug because our main power harness already has one supplied on it. Using the supplied hardware, we're going to use our 2.5mm Allen wrench to secure the amp to the amp plate. Then we'll plug in our signal inputs on the driver's side and power connector and speaker outputs on the passenger side. Now that the amplifier is installed, we'll be ready to tune it. Now, we have this free amp tuning guide that's downloadable in a link in the description of this video. You can also download it directly from our product details page at rockfordfosgate.com. Now we're ready to make our connections between our speakers and our amplifier. The first thing we're going to do when we're up under the dash is grab our radio output harness and our amplifier output harness. Now, since we're not using the built-in amplifier in the PMX radio, we're just going to go ahead and cap these off. This means that all of our speaker connections are going to happen now at the amp output directly. The front outputs go to the front left and right speakers. The rear outputs go to the rear left and right speakers. Then all we'll need to do is connect our blue wire to turn the amplifier on and off. Now that we got that done, we're ready to reinstall our lower dash. To get started, we're going to zip tie our harnesses to the factory wiring bundle that's close to the firewall. This will keep them away from the subwoofer and prevent them from rattling. Then we'll connect our main radio harness and RCA cables to the PMX source unit and then just snap the dash into place. All right, now that we have that done, we're ready to reinstall our upper dash. Now, when we reattach all of our harnesses, be careful to prop the dash up so all the clips down here don't scratch anything. Okay, now we're ready to install our rear speakers. First, we'll continue routing our wiring harnesses back through the rear tunnel. We'll follow the factory wiring out to the left and the right sides. Remember, the harness with the red dot goes to the passenger side speaker. We'll follow the tubular frame all the way up, staying away from any hot engine components or suspension like the sway bar or shocks. Then we'll exit the rear of the roll bar area and leave enough slack to make connections to the speakers. At this stage, we're ready to prepare our rear speaker clamps. First, disassemble the clamps. There are two sets of rubber inserts. For our RZR, we're going to be using the 1 3/8 to 2-inch versions. To start the assembly, we're going to wire our harness through the T-bracket. Once we have it through, take the bottom of the clamp and secure it to the T-bracket using one of the supplied nut and bolts. Then, take one bolt, feed your locking key through it and one side of the safety lanyard. Then use a nut to secure the assembly. The locking key should align with the T-bracket before tightening. Now that you have an idea on how the clamps are assembled, you'll notice that the rear speakers can typically be mounted inside or outside of the roll cage. However, with our high lifter edition that we have here, it's most practical to mount these on the outside due to the snorkels on the back. Now, to make it easier, mount the clamp so the lanyard is facing the tail end of the RZR. So let's go back to the RZR and do the install. Now that that's done, we want to talk to you about logo orientation on the rear speakers. Now, we include this rebadge kit that allows you to properly position the Diamond R on the back of the enclosure once it's mounted. Now, we also want to show you how to orient the logo on the front of the speaker. For kits that come with RM models, remove the 4 screws using the supplied bit. Then, rotate the speaker into the proper orientation. Then, resecure it back into place. Our PM speakers take a little bit more time. Remove the 4 fine-threaded screws that hold the grill in place. Remove the 2 set screws that secure the speaker. Then, disconnect the speaker wires and rotate it to determine the orientation. Using a 2mm Allen, relocate the set screws into the adjacent holes. Use a dab of Loctite included in the kit. Now we're ready to reattach the speaker. Connect the white to the positive and the black to the negative. The 2 screws originally holding the speaker in place will not be used. Also notice the grill is keyed to fit one of 2 ways. Then replace the 4 remaining screws that hold the speaker in place. Take note, we provided additional set screws for replacements if needed. Okay, we're ready to install our rear speakers. First, plug in the wiring harness and slide the speaker onto the bracket. Then secure the speaker by removing the bolt from the enclosure. Apply the provided Loctite, then position the lanyard onto the bolt. We'll then tighten the bolt using the security Torx. Alright guys, we're in the final stretch. First, we're going to make our battery connection using a 10mm socket to reconnect our ring terminals. Once we connect the ground terminal back to the battery, we'll test the system and make sure that everything is operating properly. Once that's done, we'll zip tie our wiring harnesses out of place. Now, be careful of the driveline and radiator hoses going through the center tunnel. We're going to connect our harness to the top of that factory wiring. Loop any excess harness you have in the battery compartment. Then we'll go ahead and finish the reassembly and get this RZR back out on the trails. As you can see, that install came together pretty easy. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact our technical support. They can be reached Monday through Friday at 1-800-669-9899 or through live chat at the bottom of our website at rockfordfosgate.com. Until next time, I'm Eric for Rockford Fosgate. We'll see you again soon.